The year was 1996. Pokémon Red and Green had just been released in Japan, fulfilling the lifelong dream of a man named Satoshi Tajiri. Finally, his vision of a game where kids and adults could catch, trade, and train 151 different monsters was realized, and unknown to him at the time, started a phenomenon that would grow into its own cultural zeitgeist. But the road to this point was long and winding, and there were many times when Satoshi was about to give up altogether. And if he had, I think it's reasonable to say that many of us would have had a very different childhood. The history of the Pokémon franchise begins with a young boy growing up in the suburbs of Tokyo. This young Satoshi Tajiri loved to catch bugs, tadpoles, and other small creatures near his home. As a teenager, he printed his own gaming magazine called Game Freak, where he would write tips and tricks and secrets for popular games at the time, such as Donkey Kong. Talking with his friends and other magazine contributors about games, he grew frustrated with the fact that, as he says, games just weren't very good. So, in 1989, Satoshi and his good friend Ken Sugimori formed game developing studio Game Freak, and later a design studio called Creatures. When the Game Boy was released, Satoshi saw the portability and versatility of the link cable and imagined the little insects from his childhood crawling along the wire between two Game Boys. Drawing inspiration from the kids' action TV series Ultra 7, he came up with an idea for a game he would later call Capsule Monsters. However, Nintendo was not interested in his idea and turned down his pitch multiple times. Satoshi was nearly ready to give up, but a young game designer named Shigeru Miyamoto took interest in the idea and, using his influence within the company, pushed Nintendo to develop Satoshi's idea. Development of the first Pokémon games took more than 6 years, with trademarks requiring them to change the name from Capsule Monsters to Kapumon, and finally, to Pocket Monsters. The new Pokémon project nearly drove Game Freak out of business, with many employees being forced to quit due to personal and financial issues. Tajiri himself continued to work unpaid, all for the sake of finishing his magnum opus. When Pokémon Red and Green were released in February of 1996, they were met with modest sales and esteem. People liked the game, but it just wasn't catching on as well as he had hoped. It was then soon after that one small action by one programmer on the game changed everything forever. Just before the game was set to be released, after all the debugging had been finished, a young programmer named Shigeki Morimoto, unbeknownst to anyone at Game Freak, decided to have a little fun with the remaining memory on the cartridge and created his own monster, Mew. After the game's release, the existence of Mew was discovered and picked up in gaming magazines. There was a contest held which would give Mew to 20 lucky winners. This contest received nearly 80,000 entrants, and as word got around, the game sales began to skyrocket. Soon after, the Pokémon card game was released in October of the same year and became an instant success, leading to manga and its own anime series. This anime series is where Pokémon would evolve from a successful game franchise into a global juggernaut. The popularity of the anime and its main character Pikachu led to toys, goods, memorabilia, cards, hats, and more, culminating in the opening of the very first Pokémon Center in Tokyo in 1998. Due to the huge popularity of this new Pokémon franchise, the games and anime were both released in North America in September of 1998, thanks in part to the help of the president of HAL Laboratories, Mr. Satoru Iwata. The movie Mewtwo Strikes Back would release in Japan in July of 1998 and in North America in November of 1999. This movie, with the popularity of the Pokémon games, card game, and anime series, catapulted the Pokémon franchise even further. From the very beginning of the anime series, there were monsters that were not present in the original Red, Green, Blue, or Yellow. This led many to hypothesize that there was a sequel or expansion planned for the series. Sure enough, in 1999 in Japan and 2000 in North America, Pokémon Gold and Silver were released, showcasing 100 additional Pokémon. During the game's development, only the Johto region was included. However, Satoru Iwata, who was never actually part of Game Freak, once again took it upon himself to improve the game. Utilizing some unique compression and memory-saving techniques, he managed to fit nearly the entire first Pokémon game world into Gold and Silver, essentially doubling the available content. Pokémon Gold and Silver would be a major turning point for the series. It took the ideas of the first games and expanded nearly every one of them. These games gave us shiny Pokémon, breeding, day and night cycles, the friendship system, and more. Along with these new games, new cards for the card game, a new anime series, new movies, and even more spin-offs were developed. With the release of the Game Boy Advance, the Pokémon franchise continued to change and grow, and in 2002, Ruby and Sapphire were released. These games gave us 135 new Pokémon, Pokemon contests, double battles, Pokemon abilities, natures, reformed EVs and IVs, and of course, too much water. However, while Pokemon Red, Green, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, and later Crystal had all been somewhat compatible with each other, the extensive changes that were brought with the new Game Boy Advance versions meant that trading between the old and the new was now impossible. So, to help with this and, let's be honest, to make a few extra bucks, Nintendo released updated versions of Red and Green for the Game Boy Advance, called Fire Red and Leaf Green respectively. Later, in 2004 and 2005, Pokemon Emerald was released to finish up the whole end storyline, as well as add even more additional features, such as the Battle Frontier, rebattling gym leaders, an altered plotline, and all new animations. And of course, the manga and anime caught up as well, driving game, toy, and card sales even higher. 2006 marked the 10th anniversary for the Pokemon franchise. To celebrate, the Journey Across America was held with Pokemon tournaments, contests, and more. A special episode of the anime series was released, showcasing the new voice acting cast. This, however, did not go well with fans, who were upset over the voice changes. With the release of Nintendo's newest handheld, the Nintendo DS, the new Pokemon games were developed, and in 2006 we saw the release of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. These games showcased a pseudo 3D world, 107 new Pokemon, gender differences in Pokemon, physical and special move splits, and a new storyline. The anime series aired simultaneously in Japan and the US, with 3 new movies released as well. Later, in 2008 and 2009, Pokemon Platinum was released, bringing even more changes to the series, including new evolution forms of certain Pokemon. With the remakes of Red and Green on the Game Boy Advance, many fans had been hoping for remakes of other Pokemon games as well, especially the fan favorites of Gold and Silver. And in 2009 and 2010, Nintendo released Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver on the DS, as well as a new expansion for the Pokemon trading card game. At this point, many fans and critics alike were growing tired of the Pokemon franchise, as nothing substantial had changed, and the games were simply repeating themselves, only adding more Pokemon. Nintendo and Game Freak decided it was time for a change, and in late 2010, Pokemon Black and White were released. With 156 new Pokemon, it was announced that no legacy Pokemon would be available until after the main story had been completed. A revamped time and date system that now included seasons was introduced. Pokemon contests were removed and triple battles were added. Also, though previous games had had minor differences between the two versions of each generation, Black and White would offer substantial changes between the two versions. Rather than simply releasing a third version, as had been done for every generation previous, Black and White would receive direct sequels, cleverly titled Black 2 and White 2 in 2012. The story took place 2 years after the original, with many changes throughout the world of Unova. Just 1 year later, in 2013, Nintendo held a Nintendo Direct and announced the newest addition to the Pokemon franchise, Pokemon X and Y. These would of course be released on the successor to the DS, the 3DS. These two games once again brought some very heavy changes to the series. For the first time, the games were completely in 3D, and all new evolutions, called Mega Evolutions, were introduced, allowing Pokemon such as Charizard and Mewtwo to evolve even further, expanding the Pokédex by 72 for a total of 721 available Pokemon. Soon after, in November of 2014, 3DS remakes of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire were released, making the entire Pokemon series available to old and new players alike. This brings us to 2016 and the 20th anniversary of the Pokemon series. With the release of Pokemon Go and now Pokemon Sun and Moon, one can only speculate where the series will go from here. There is obviously still so much love and adoration for the series by both young and old, and it will only continue to get bigger. From its humble beginnings as a mere pipe dream of the young aspiring game creator into the second highest selling game franchise of all time. And to think, it all started with one young boy and a pocket full of bugs. Thank you all so very much for watching this video on the Commonwealth Realm. Go on over to my channel and subscribe. Link is down below. Above all else, have a great day, and we'll see you all back here on the Commonwealth Realm.